I am so excited to welcome California's Poet Laureate, Lee Herrick, to our conversation today. Can you begin by reading a poem for us?
Sure, I'd be happy to. This is a poem where I was imagining and hoping and remembering things I'd seen in California.
Okay.
My California. Here, an olive votive keeps the sunset lit. The Korean 20-somethings talk about hyphens, graduate school, and good pot. And a group of 4 at a windowed table in Carpinteria discuss the quality of wines in Napa Valley versus Lodi. Here, in my California, the streets remember the Chicano poet whose songs still bank off Fresno's beer-soaked gutters and almond trees in partial blossom. Here, in my California, we fish out long noodles from the pho with such accuracy you'd know we'd done this before. In Fresno, the bullets tire of themselves and begin to pray 5 times a day. In Fresno, we hope for less of the police state and more of a state of grace. In my California, you can watch the sun go down like in your California. On the ledge of the pregnant 22nd century, the one with a bounty of peaches and grapes, red onions and the good salsa, wine and japchae. Here, in my California, paperbacks are free. Farmers markets are 24 hours a day and always packed. The trees and water have no nails in them. The priests eat well. The homeless eat well. Here, in my California, everywhere is Chinatown. Everywhere is K-Town. Everywhere is Armenia Town. Everywhere, a little Italy. Less Confederacy, no internment in the valley, better history texts for the juniors. In my California, free sounds and free touch, free questions, free answers, free songs from parents and poets, those hopeful bodies of light.
That was an amazing poem. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I can imagine that that contributed mightily to your being appointed the Poet Laureate of the state.
It may have, I don't know. I mean, the appointment and the nomination process, especially in a state like California, where there are legions of stellar poets and countless poets doing the work, and for many years. So that might have, but I think it's one of many poems of mine, and I think the poets that I admire here have that spirit of our state in their work in some way or another.
Well, I particularly liked the line where you say, I think it was the bullets became afraid of themselves, or the hope is that the bullets will stop and we ascend to a state of grace in some way.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about the act of shooting and violence and the range of emotions that must go into that: fear, anger, retribution, and I want to believe that ultimately fatigue and changing course is involved with that, whether it's gun violence or any other kinds of aggression or violence. And so that line was my thinking about that.
And as the state's first Asian American Poet Laureate, I believe, is it your plan to bring visibility not only to the accomplishments of the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, but also of the horrific crimes that have been committed against that community in the wake of the pandemic?
It's been deeply moving meeting writers and families and students and poets who know the stories, they are the stories, and see someone with whom they can have these conversations and talk about these difficulties. But one of the great things is having a platform, you know this, and being able to talk about these things to audiences that might not otherwise hear them, whether it's some civic organization or a political organization or an academic one. So I do hope to. I'm speaking with some different organizations around the state and doing some projects with that visibility and some of those issues, yeah.
And before we began our interview today, you were saying that you're going from this interview almost immediately to meetings with the governor's office. That must be an amazing and humbling aspect of your position as well. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, just the process was very eye-opening, just to see the magnitude of the work they do. The staffs are both sizable and incredible. These are hardworking, passionate people who love this state. So the appointment process and what we were talking about right before this was the program I'm doing with the first partner, Siebel Newsom. She, of course, is a documentarian and deeply invested in the arts. And so she has a summer book club, and she has invited me to be on tour with her just to a few libraries throughout the state. And so we will be working with kids and teens. They'll be reading books, and then I'm going to be reading some poems, and I've created some prompts for the kids. And the themes that first partner Siebel Newsom is focusing on this year, I think you'll like. I love them. They're girls and women leaning into power, and boys and men leaning into care. And so all of the books are centered around those themes, in addition to the cultures and their family backgrounds. So it's going to be exciting.
Well, as a follow-up, you and I had the good fortune to be part of a program at the Pico Union Library yesterday, and we both said how much we enjoyed it, particularly the students. And I'm hoping for our audience you can talk a little bit about how you saw it from your position as the state poet laureate.
There was a real electricity there. There were a lot of local organizations, from LA Unified to some literacy organizations, employment opportunities, and you and I read, and we judged some kids' poems, and you kindly gave them some perks for their accomplishments. It was wonderful seeing the families, and that's a big part of the joy of this position, is being able to go to communities that you've heard of and admired from afar, but never been in their local library with the families, hearing the kids read the poems. As the poet F. Douglas Brown was saying, as Doug was saying, poetry lives in Pico Union, and had the crowd chanting that. I think it's a good way to look at the whole state. There's poetry everywhere here.
But you did say something to me about Los Angeles in particular that I'd like you to share with our audience as well, as you're coming from Fresno, which is your home base, into Los Angeles. What was it that you said to me?
About being at State of Its Own?
Yes.
Well, we were talking about different laureateships, and it's one of the great things is that a small town of 10,000 people can have a laureate, and he or she or they are bringing together their communities. And we were talking about different states, and I said, Los Angeles is like a state of its own, and your laureateship and the work you did has impacts throughout the state and throughout the country. A city like Los Angeles is unique around the world. So it's exciting to see that, and it's really wonderful to be here. Yeah, it's impressive what you've been doing.
And not just me, but bringing the community together, I think, is the key for all of us who are lucky enough to be in a position to try to make that happen.
Yeah.
And I hope you enjoyed as much as I did the fact that we could read some of the poems of the students ourselves, the ones that were unable to make it. I think they were a little younger, maybe second graders, so they were unable to make the festival. But how did it feel to read those poems?
It was great. I still have one in my mind. I can't remember the student. I know she was a second grader, but I can still recite her one-line poem from yesterday.
Let's hear it.
She was a second grader.
Yes.
From Equitas Academy.
Correct.
Her poem was this: 6 and 8 went on a date and sat at table 48.
We agreed. We loved that.
Yeah, it was fun. I just loved seeing the kids. It was wonderful.
And with that, would you grace us with another one of your poems?
I would be happy to. Thought I'd read a poem that I wrote while I was reading a lot and hearing a lot in the news about shootings, gun violence, innocent black and brown people dying. So this is titled, What I Hear When I Hear You in My Head. Is the little whisper, the aggregate sorrow, the father's heavy weeping as the son's heavy weeping. What I hear is your artistic response after the massacre, the family of clasped hands, black hands, brown hands, a small child whose brother never had a chance, who holds her father's tearful face and says, your eyes are like the moon, is what I hear when I hear you in my head this evening, your laughter like tiny harps. I hear your fatigue as another way to say deprivation. I hear recount, retally. A retaliation is what I hear when I hear you in my head this evening. It's the grace, the charm, the dead, the boy, the dead boy, the boy who died because of the fear, the forest in the other man's heart, the gun, the heartbreak is the sound I hear. When I hear you in my head is how we each sigh with distinction, where fatigue meets fire, where we wake and wonder if we all go out to a field tonight, sit by a fire, and say the most honest thing you've ever said in your life. Would any dead boy or girl reappear? Not like a mirage, but reappear. Not like a voice in my head, but a body in this room, with flesh and bones, with his big smile and orange blossoms in his billowing hair.
The father with the forest in his heart really, really grabbed me. And I'm thinking about how often your poems deal with family, either directly or parenthetically or parent adjacent.
You know, poets were often asked what inspires our work, what fuels us. I remember one of my favorite poets said that the present day, but also the future, but mainly that she's inspired by 100, 200 years of ancestry before her. In my case, not knowing my birth family, I sometimes wonder if I needed or I was supposed to be a poet. It's one of those art forms through which we can bring the past to the present, even if we don't know them. So I have never met my birth mother or first mother, don't know my first father, birth father. So poetry has been a way to write about that a little bit. And also, you know, in a poem like What I Hear When I Hear You in My Head, the headline and the 3-minute news story is maybe at a press conference. There might be a relative in extreme grief, but the longevity and the duration of that grief is not televised, and that's where art can come in. Anytime I'm thinking about grief or suffering, I'm thinking of it from a whole range, whether it's generations or known or unknown family and the people we long for and miss and things like that.
How do we approach these issues? I know a poet that we both admire has said, for example, everybody wanted to write about George Floyd. But how could you tell the story in a way that wasn't the same as maybe 50 other poets told it? How do you get into the story? With that in mind, how much getting into the story are you able to do while you hold this position of Poet Laureate? Because you are everywhere, every day it seems like 24/7. So my question really is about your ability to write in the midst of all of that.
Well, as a poet, and as a poet first, after, I should say, father and husband, but as a poet, I need to be mindful of that all the time. I love the events and am deeply honored and truly joyful. But if I'm not writing, then there's something off. So what I'm finding are new ways with energy, new ways to think about my writing. I'm focusing a lot now on sonnets and sound and trying to ride this wave if I can. So I am writing, and I go back to the things that have worked for me in the past, but I'm also trying some new things with the poems. One of the things I think that can fuel our writing is keeping the fundamental things with us while we are experiencing new things. So yeah, I'm determined to write.
Are you a journal keeper?
I am. I used to write a lot on legal notepads. Now I enter notes in my phone. I've got a lot of notes, and I think of them like a good chef might go to a farmer's market and gather little seeds or herbs or ingredients she might not know what to make with yet, but she'll make a good dish eventually. So yeah, big note taker. I've seen you at some events recently, and just jotting down notes when I hear things from poets and just everyday sounds, really.
I do think that having that responsibility as laureate, as you say, you do find different ways to capture. You may not sit down for 2 hours and write a poem like you might have prior to the appointment, but you do find ways to capture things that you know you're going to use somewhere down the line.
One challenge is just time.
Yes.
Just the amount of volume of the work. But within that, I told somebody at an event a few days ago, and I hope this doesn't sound too cheesy, but joy is its own kind of wave.
Yes.
And its own kind of fuel. And so I'm writing that. Yesterday at the Pico Union Library event, there was a young boy who read a wonderful poem, and he was a big sports fan and very outgoing. And so that kind of spirit, it's good fuel to keep going and to write and love this work.
I'm wondering, your students, you teach at Fresno City College, I believe?
Yes.
And have for how many years?
This is my 27th year.
So a long-time teacher. And what were your students' reactions when they heard that you were appointed?
I had a feeling that I was going to be appointed, and the governor's office arranged to bring some people down to my classroom and do some filming. And so there were a couple of women and a camera person filming the class. But what they didn't tell me was that Governor Newsom and First Partner Siebel Newsom were going to be visiting. So I was teaching the class, and the students were talking about their poems, and students came up and read a few poems. And I got back up, and all of a sudden, as I was speaking, the door opened up, and Governor Newsom walked into the room, and followed by his wife.
Official Poet Laureate for the state of California. Poet Laureate. It's like for the fourth largest economy in the world. He's the man. She took the right course.
He was very kind and generous. He stayed for a good half hour. He talked about his dyslexia, which he's been open about, but I had forgotten about. And so he talked about how important books have been for him. And it was a really inspiring visit. But to your question, how did the students respond? About half of the class gasped. And the other half of the class was, as they told me later, one student said, when he walked in, I wasn't sure who that was. And then she said, no, we realized. It was very exciting. And the great thing is to see students take that away, because it's not about me. And I'll argue, I would like to think he would agree, it's not even about him. It's about the communities, students, Californians, people doing the work, far away from any camera. That's the great thing, was seeing that in the students' faces.
And as you were saying that about his feeling about books, I thought one of the things I wanted to ask you, which isn't poetry specific and yet could be, is the idea that we're living in a period once again where books are being banned and certain courses of study are being banned. And you and I have lived long enough to be surprised and not surprised. We talked about that a little bit on the way over. Can you talk about using your platform as Poet Laureate to address that seemingly growing movement in our state and in our country?
Yeah, it is it's foundational, it's formative for this country, whether it's violence or exclusion. So part of my program or project as California Poet Laureate is that in many of the events, I'm inviting local organizers to bring to the event a local social justice or civic engagement group. So that can be Black Lives Matter, it could be an LGBTQ organization or indigenous rights, it could be a tree planting group. But the idea is to encourage people to see poetry and the arts as inextricably intertwined with the civic fabric where they live. And I think the more that becomes part of people's consciousness, the less likely it is for what I would consider to be harmful policies, not in any partisan way, but just in terms of knowledge, our history, in the name of what I would humbly consider progress, opportunity, less fear, less violence.
Given all that your experiences, and I know you're just a few months in, what has been the most surprising in this journey thus far?
At an event, meeting someone or meeting people who love poetry, who maybe write it a little bit, are maybe new to events, but who leave larger. I sense, or they tell me that they feel differently, not because of anything I've said necessarily, but being in a space where poetry is celebrated and connected to their lives. So I don't know that it's necessarily transformative, but I can tell they feel a little bit larger, a little bit more possibility or hope, or possibly even direction for them to the page in whatever they're experiencing. Those are very exciting moments for me.
It sounds wonderful, and I just, as I listen to you, I'm so grateful that you were selected. The governor absolutely made a fantastic choice, and I know we're all going to be the richer for it.
Oh, that means a lot, Lynn. Thank you.
You are quite welcome. Let's have a poem to close us out.
Okay. So this is a poem that references parts of California, but it's also global, I think, and it's sort of a love song for street food and taco trucks.
Excellent.
So this is A.B. Siderian Love Song for Street Food, and it has an epigraph from the late Anthony Bourdain, who said, "Street food, I believe, is the salvation of the human race. All praise for the pozole glistening in midday light by the grace of the woman near the Comal. In Southern California, Raul Martinez unveiled a mobile downtown gold mine of Al Pastor by a bar in East LA for the drunks, the artists, the necessary future waiting in line. Praise be to the ice cream truck, glory of the van's slow roll, so praise the van, hut, cart, booth, tent, stall, stand, bike, or truck. I once devoured a tlayuda in Oaxaca City, broke down just as the sunlight burst through the heart of a woman, kissing her baby's forehead by the plaza. When I say love, what I mean to say is, I dream of you through disaster, malady, or drought. Now, even in this late dying, let us praise the 20,000 open-hearted vendors in Bangkok and the glorious pupusas in San Salvador I ate on a bench near a dove. Quesadilla, arepa, tteokbokki, hallelujah. The banh mi right on the outskirts of Hue. The chili pepper, the cilantro songs, praise the Zocalo saints who brought me to tears with a taco so full of music I almost wept. Under the Beijing moonlight, baozi is made by angels, vendors with wings if you know where to look. On West 53rd and 6th Avenue, New York City, halal. Or in Fresno, no xenophobe is welcome. Tell me what to eat. Your chuan, your elote, your mouthful of pure zen, like savory, surprising flashes of heaven.
Well, thank you for leaving us hungry, and thank you for joining us today. It's been a joy.
Thank you so much for having me.